Shall we? The Central Bank of Nigeria is urging Nigerians to support the currency redesign project, which is in their overall interests and that of the economy at large. That's according to the Apex Bank. The Apex Bank is also insisting that it follow the law and due process to carry out the redesigning exercise, which is 12 years due. This is coming as a former deputy governor of the Apex Bank, Professor Kingsley Moghalu, commended the Apex Bank on the proposed exercise of the Naira, saying the measure will address insecurity in the country. Apex Bank's clarification came against the backdrop of claims by the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, that her ministry was not carried along in the process of redesigning of the Naira. Well, let's dissect the issues and possible implications with an economic and investment strategist, Mr. Ayorinde Akinloye. He joins us live virtually on the program. Thank you indeed, Mr. Ayorinde, for joining us here on Business Nigeria.
Thank you very much for having me on this show. Yes. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Let me start by asking you, because Section 10, Subsection 3 of the Constitution says the Apex Bank, I'm paraphrasing, can go ahead and take on such an exercise with the consent, of course, of Mr. President. In your opinion, did the CBN or the CBN governor do anything wrong at all?
Not at all. Not at all. The CBN did not do anything wrong. In terms of redesigning and issuing currency and everything regarding the currency management in Nigeria, everything around that responsibility is domiciled with the CBN. And the only person they need to get approval for, particularly when it comes to the issue of reissuing or redesigning the Naira, is just the president's approval is what they need. It's important to remember that the CBN is an independent body on its own, established to run and function on its own. Also, the CBN has a board. The CBN has a board of directors where the governors, that's the deputy governors of the central bank, the governor of the central bank, key representatives from a few of the other ministries, like the Ministry of Finance, for example, they are all represented on the board of the CBN. And for this kind of decision to be taken, definitely there would have been a board approval before the CBN, took that to the president for his approval. And once the president gives his final approval, then everything is definitely within the law and the constitutional mandate of the CBN to manage and, to manage everything regarding issuance of currency in Nigeria.
Yes, so why is this generating so much controversy, so much fears, so much knocks as well, and even kudos for the Apex Bank?
Well, yes, I think it's in different dimensions when you talk about the sort of controversies that have been generated. First is among, some of the top economic officials. I think about a few days back, the Minister of Finance came out to say she was not aware and her ministry was not carried along with regards to the CBN's decision. But it's important, first of all, to state that the CBN is not mandated to have to communicate to the Minister of Finance or the Ministry of Finance their decision to redesign or reissue new Naira notes. They don't have to communicate that decision. That's one thing that is important to establish. Again, it's also to note the fact that the CBN is not under the supervision of the Ministry of Finance. The CBN, like I said earlier, is an independent body, and the acts that established the CBN has mandated the CBN to take care of anything that has to do with currency issues within the Nigerian Federation. So the sort of controversy we have seen in that segment is mainly a case of maybe some key officials felt that they were left behind in the process and were not aware of this CBN's decision. But it's just a case of reminding me of calling the fact that this is within the constitutional mandate of the CBN. Then the other side of controversies being generated is mainly on the side of the populace, the general public saying, is this what we really need now? I've seen comments, here about will reissuing new currency notes for the 200 naira, 500 naira, 1,000 naira notes will necessarily solve Nigeria's mounting economic problems and all the other issues we have. And those are issues that are sort of on the minds of average Nigerians out there who are sort of really sort of like they are gobsmacked that is this really the way to go in terms of solving all the economic issues that we have? But it's important to also know that there are so many other reasons, which I'm sure we'll discuss later on in the program, on why the CBN may be doing this and other things to also consider. But that is why we are seeing those controversies, on that different side entirely.
All right, Mr. Ayorinde, let's discuss some of these issues. The CBN has given a lot of reasons for wanting to do this. One of them is to counter or tackle issues around counterfeiting, to reduce the money in circulation. But ultimately, I think it's to reduce the level of inflationary rates, which is almost at 23%, almost at 23%. So when you look at this monetary policy, this exercise, this project, are you very optimistic that this indeed will curb inflation? This indeed will perhaps curb the surge in the prices of goods and services, as we have seen very recently? We have the festive period just around the corner.
Okay, thank you. So first, it definitely there are pros and there are cons towards the decision from the CBN. And from my analysis and looking at all the possible reasons why the CBN could be implementing this, I feel strongly that there would likely be follow-up policies on this, maybe by next year, maybe once we begin to get towards the deadline for the circulation of the currencies and the existing notes season as a legal tender. We might likely see some follow-up policies from the CBN to really drive home the benefits of these decisions to redesign the currency. But I will just speak it first on the different reasons that the CBN has highlighted. First, they highlighted the fact that counterfeiting of the naira is at record highs, which is actually very true. Many times you go to the bank, particularly for business owners who operate large cash flow businesses, where they deal heavily in physical cash in terms of the transactions that they do with their customers and clients. They get to the banks to deposit funds, and so several of those notes are rejected by the bank tellers or the cashiers at the stand when you're making deposits, simply because a lot of these notes are actually counterfeited notes. So we actually had quite record highs when you look at the volume of counterfeit notes that are circulating within the country, and that is because we've seen significant advancements in cryptographic technology across the world, which has made it easier for counterfeiters to sort of produce these currencies. Now, the other thing is, when you look at the total amount of cash, this is not talking about money supply now, this is talking about physical currency within the Nigerian economy. According to the CBN, we have about roughly 3.2, 3.3 trillion within the Nigerian economy. And more than 85% of that is well outside the bank vault. So meaning they are in the hands of different individuals, in different locations. That is a significant concern. Yes, this has been the way it has been this way even way back in 1960s, 1970s. If you analyze the data of the percentage of cash that has been outside of the banking vault over the past say 40, 50 years, you would actually be seeing it above 80% levels across board. But it is something that the CBN wants to really rein in on by basically calling back all these notes and reissuing new notes. But like I said earlier, it's not going to be enough for the CBN to call back these notes, like the 200 to 1,000 naira notes, and then reissue new notes. Because what it simply means is, once you reissue the new notes, people will just go back to the banks, begin to withdraw, and over time, we would be back to where we are currently. So there's a need for the CBN to, work around, sort of implementing limits on deposits that can be on cash withdrawals that can be done by individuals to sort of drive the Nigerian populace to more or less adopt the cashless economy, so that we won't have lots of physical cash circulating outside of the banking system. That is on that side. Then on the aspect of inflation, I strongly doubt that this is going to help solve inflationary problems. I've seen across different quarters where a couple of analysts have said that this is likely going to be a form of unorthodox monetary policy to sort of rein in on inflation. But the truth is, to rein in on inflation is not just about curbing the supply of physical cash. It's about the aggregate money supply in the economy. Remember, even if I don't transact with physical cash, I can transact by making a transfer, by doing cashless transactions. So that does not really, taking out physical cash does not mean you are reducing or shrinking money supply. The aggregate money supply in the Nigerian economy today, that's when you're talking about M2, M3, that's broad money supply. We're talking about roughly around 42, 43 trillion naira. So that is what the CBN needs to focus on if they are attempting to fight inflation by curbing money supply. The 3.5 trillion that we have in circulation is less than 10% of the aggregate money supply within the economy. And that aggregate money supply is what drives inflation.
Right.
So it's literally not going to have any effect in that regards. And the last thing I will mention is the policy is creating panic in the foreign exchange markets, because a lot of people who have significant cash stashed in private hands and locations are having to convert those funds to FX, and that is driving FX losses and also impacting on inflation through imported goods.
Fascinating insights, Mr. Ayorinde. I have to squeeze in as many questions as possible because the EFCC has also jumped into the party. I'm not sure if you're aware, but if you are, Mr. Abdurrashid Bawa, the chairman of the EFCC, has commended the CBN for this move as well. Reno Mokri, controversial Reno Mokri, of course, who has supported this idea. I mentioned Professor Kingsley Mohalu earlier as well. But let me take you up on the finance minister, Madam Zainab Ahmed, who has warned of dire consequences. I wonder perhaps if you could, in 60 seconds or less, run us through this possible consequences and implications for Nigerians and the economy.
Okay. Yes, so I think in terms of the consequences and probably like you mentioned, the Minister of Finance, what the main fear is particularly for Nigerians living in the rural areas where, for example, financial inclusion in Nigeria, I think our financial inclusion rate is somewhere about 70% or a bit less than that. So we have quite a number of Nigerians that are actually not within the banking system. So they don't even have a bank account where they can take their funds to go and remit to. So there's going to be a need for significant sensitization and mobilization at deep grassroots levels. I'm talking about the rural areas, the villages down in the deep parts of so many other states. We're not talking about the likes of Lagos, Abuja, or most of these central states in the urban areas. We're talking about the deep rural areas. It's going to be important for CBN to conduct sensitizations in those areas for a lot of these cities, for a lot of people living in those areas, not to lose their funds, because so many of them don't keep their monies in the bank, and they have most of their net worth or their wealth or their fiscal cash basically kept in their houses. And that means they would basically lose all their wealth if the CBN moves ahead to render those currencies to no longer be legal tenders, and that would be a significant concern. Then the other part is also the cost at which the CBN would be reissuing these new notes. The last data that was available from the CBN in terms of currency issuance, the cost, I think that was in 2020, the CBN said it spent roughly about 58 billion naira to print about 1.1 trillion naira worth of currencies. That's in terms of the naira value. The number of notes they printed were about 2 point something billion thereabouts. This time around, they are going to be redesigning the naira, and then they would now reprint, then they will now go ahead to print, because the 58 billion I mentioned earlier for 2020 only was about printing, not even redesigning. So redesigning, printing, yes, it's going to be on the larger currency, larger denomination. So the number of notes that will be printed will not be as high, but reprinting roughly about anywhere between, say, 2 to 3 trillion, because if you recall 3 trillion back from the economy, then you will most likely be printing back anywhere between 1.5 to 2.5 trillion. That would probably cost the CBN another maybe roughly 100 billion to actually complete this exercise. So that's a significant cost that we have to ask ourselves and say, do we have the capacity to bear that kind of cost at this point in time? But again, it's about looking at the pros and the cons of the decision to redesign the currency and see if it's actually worth us expending that volume of money.
Well, we have to wrap things off, Mr. Ayorinde, but I wonder perhaps what you think the CBN should have been doing differently instead of towing this particular line of redesigning the Naira notes. What should the CBN be doing differently at this time as we wrap things off? And can I also ask you perhaps why are there no plans to redesign the 20, 50, and 100 Naira notes?
Okay. So I hope I got that clearly, because it was like it broke off a bit towards the end. But in terms of what the CBN can be doing, so first I just like to say that it's important to mention that the CBN is not entirely wrong in this decision they decided to take, right? Because there are valid reasons for the CBN to actually redesign and reprint new Naira notes. The only question is if we can afford it, considering, the dire finances of the CBN and the federal government overall. So that is just the question to answer, and the possible implications on people living in rural areas who are excluded from the banking system. So, but there are valid reasons for the CBN to consider this. But in terms of alternative actions that the CBN can be taking, a lot of the things CBN can do in terms of fighting inflation and helping to strengthen security and the integrity of the Naira is more trying to enforce the banking regulation. So, for example, when you go to the bank to deposit a certain amount of money above a certain level for an individual or for a business, your account will be flagged and the details will be sent to NFIU, and other agencies for checks to ensure that the transaction is not connected to any fraudulent activity or terrorism activity or any, maybe kidnapping or things like that. But the truth is, a lot of these policies are not being effected as they should be, and that is why we are seeing these leakages around the system. So what I think the CBN should be doing is to strengthen, the enforcement of these legislations when certain transactions beyond certain thresholds are done. Appropriate investigations should be done, and when illegitimate or say fraudulent, when transactions with fraudulent causes are identified,
right,
then the perpetrators and offenders should be brought to book in conjunction with all the other security agencies. So I think it's more collaboration with these security agencies to enforce AML and CFT rules are the key things that the CBN can do.
Well, we will watch and see how this exercise pans out. It's been set for January 31st. Another subject of controversy is around the issue. Some have mentioned the timing of this exercise and project, but we'll wait and see. We wish the Central Bank of Nigeria the best, and we hope that indeed inflation will be curbed. But we must thank you most kindly for your fascinating thoughts and perspective, Mr. Ayorinde Akinloye, Economic and Investment Strategist. Thank you indeed for speaking with us here on Business Nigeria.
Thank you very much for having me on the show. It's always a pleasure. Do have a lovely day.